All right, well, it is Mike Sigrist in the Rivals League up against challenger Antonio Del Moral Leon playing Golgari Midrange, a deck that we don't really see too often this weekend or won't be seeing too much of, but a super cool take on a midrange deck indeed.
Yeah, both decks really just trying to go over top of each other. Clearly built with Jund in mind. Casualties of War. Really good against these Jund food decks. They're playing an oven, playing a Trail of Crumbs, playing a creature, and suddenly you've gotten a 4-for-1 for your sorcery, and that's what swings the game around. So Delmar Leon's deck clearly built to target Jund and try to go over top of him, but this is not a matchup you're going over top of anything. 5-color Niv is the go over top deck in the format, perhaps. So I agree with the panel. I think the 5-color deck has the edge here.
All right, well, let's see how things get underway here as we have Wolf Haven on a land. So Antonio is getting his ramp game going there. Has plenty of action in hand with Binding the Old Gods, 2 Casualties of War, 2 Elder Gargaroths, as well as a Phyrexian Arena to get some extra cards in hand.
Yeah, Arena coming down nice and early, a big boon for this Golgari midrange deck. Going to at least have access to some amount of card advantage. However, the big first test for the Niv deck has already been passed. Mike Sigrist is going to have a turn 5 Niv-Mizzet. So from here on out, it's going to be what he hits, how many cards he gets, because with the help of the cards he gets, and most specifically the Scarab God, if he's able to find one, I think he's going to be able to make short work of this mid-range deck from Antonio.
And you know what the great thing is? If he does happen to whiff with the first Niv-Mizzet, he's just got a spare ready and waiting, which is super cool indeed. And it's going to come in handy because there's a Thoughtseize for Antonio, and he's going to be desperate to take a peek in that hand.
Yeah, he's going to get the very bad news of the second Niv being there, because unfortunately for Antonio, he actually does not have a 5th land yet. So Elder Gargaroth, not in the cards for this turn, but if he misses again on the next 2 draw spells, it also won't draw steps. It won't be in the cards for next turn. And if that ends up being the case, then this game could just be over if Mike hits a good number of cards off of this Niv-Mizzet Reborn.
All right, Niv, let's see what you can find for us. What do we reveal off the top of the library? 3, that's not bad.
That's
Scarab
a good
God.
hit.
That is super good. Scarab God, Hydra Krasis, and a Maelstrom Pulse. What more could you ask for?
Oh, 2 5-drops.
Oh, no.
Not like this. Oh, you see the
that
nod.
hurts so much.
Oh, Antonio. And this has to hurt so much for Antonio. He's got a hand that is all gas. This is a position where he may actually be able to put up a decent fight against this Niv-Mizzet, whether it's Gargaroth being able to attack and challenge it, whether it's casualties if he had more mana, but instead all he can do is just remove this and shake his head as he's got a hand of all uncastables, and Mike does not have that problem.
Oh, no. Mike is sitting pretty right now with so many options available to him. Sure, some cards aren't going to find a target, like Shadow's Verdict, that sort of thing. But, you know, he's just kind of spoiled for choice at this point. What do you think he's going to go for here first?
I would guess that either Yasharn to hit more lands, ultimately what you want is Scarab God and start activating it, or Hydroid Krasis to hit more lands. The goal is ultimately the same in both cases. You're trying to find your land drops to get the Scarab God down. He could just play Scarab God right now and just look at Antonio and say, I don't think you have that many answers in your main deck. In addition to these bindings, we do see the casualties in his hand, but he's still 2 mana away. So binding the Old Gods, even if it puts a land into play tapped during Antonio's draw step, it still wouldn't push him to 6 mana until perhaps the next turn. So I like this position from Mike, getting that land, perhaps just Maelstrom pulsing the Phyrexian Arena right now, and cutting down this card advantage from Antonio. Could even consider going Maelstrom Pulse on the Wolf Haven and just fully put Antonio back into turn 3 of the game if you wanted.
Oh, that would be so rude. Goes for the Phyrexian Arena, stopping that additional card draw each turn. Oh no, Vraska off the top of the library there. We'll be able to cast it, but certainly not what you want to see. And on the side of the hand, did find a Triumph, so we do finally get land number 4 down on the battlefield here for Antonio.
Yeah, we'll have access to 5 mana next turn. The big question remaining right now is next turn too late? Vraska coming down can, I believe, sacrifice the Binding the Old Gods to draw a card, as the sacrifice of Vraska is not part of the cost of the ability, but rather part of the resolution. So it should be possible to sacrifice this Vraska, sacrifice this Binding the Old Gods and draw a card here.
Yep, and gain a life may be relevant somewhere down the line. It's
Still
okay
no
for the
land.
time being, but how have we not found another land? Binding the Old Gods, just putting the work in, finding that triome, giving Antonio a glimmer of hope. But, you know, on the other side, if he manages to find a land, he can start unlocking his super powerful spells, and he's going to need to do that because we can see what's looming in Sigrist's hand. We can see the Scarab God. We can see Hydroid Krasis.
Yeah, unfortunately for Antonio, he's a land away from Casualties of War. Mike is a land away from Scarab God. Return Niv-Mizzet to the battlefield and do it all over again. That is part of the power of the engine this 5-color Niv deck has built. It's not just you have 4 copies of Niv-Mizzet. It's once you get into this grindy fight, you have all the copies of Niv-Mizzet. You can continue refilling your hand turn after turn and putting your opponent back in check over and over again.
Hey, guess what? We finally drew a land.
Yeah,
Finally.
this land, not even too little too late yet, it is able to cast Casualties of War, deal with Hydroid Krasis, Cold Steel Heart, and a land that would put Mike 2 turns back from the plan of Scarab God plus Activate, and that may just be the amount of time Antonio needs here.
Well, certainly doesn't have a lack of options in hand as he looks to be going towards Casualties of War. Got some pretty good options to pick through on Mike Sigrist's board.
Yeah, the fun part for Antonio is now figuring out exactly which land to hit from Mike Sigrist to take off the optimal color. Take a moment to look at the lands, look at the list. What is the right choice? And still thinking about that here as he's choosing the most for Casualties of War. Which land is going to be leaving is the big question.
Yasharn gonna get taken out along with the artifact, and it looks like the breeding pool got taken care of. Vraska gonna plus again, no sacrifice this time as we pass the turn back to Mike Sigrist, who draws a triumph off the top of the library.
Antonio choosing to Casualties the Yasharn makes a lot of sense. He knows that from Mike's point of view, regardless of which creature is removed, Mike is going to remove Vraska on the next turn. If that happens, he would rather leave the creature that can be eliminated on the battlefield, and Yasharn is not that creature. So now if Antonio draws an untapped land, he would have been able to go Eldor Gargaroth plus eliminate. Because of that tap land, he has the choice of going Casualties again, or going for Nissa plus eliminate this time, and have those options. But the Scarab God is on the battlefield, and even if Antonio uses Casualties to get rid of it right now, that is a temporary answer. Scarab God will just keep coming back over and over again.
Yep. It's kind of like a cockroach, right? You think you get rid of it, but nope, it just keeps coming back.
And he kind of looks like a cockroach, too,
Yeah,
if you
he
really
does.
look at the art pretty closely.
The Cockroach God doesn't have the same ring as Scarab, but, you know, we'll go with it.
I do love the card, though. It's one of those cards that I really wish was seeing more play in Historic up to this point. I think there was some potential in the Sultai midrange decks of old for it to find a home, but the format just didn't really allow for it, and this 5-color Niv deck is a perfect home.
Any option to protect it here with Tyrant Scorn?
Considering it's going to go back to your hand anyways, not really. I think you're going to save your Tyrant Scorn to make a tempo play. You know, based on deck lists, that Antonio has 4 copies of Eldor Gargaroth in his deck, and even if you don't want to go for that route, you can use your Tyrant Scorn to perhaps bounce your Hydroid Crisis if your opponent has something like an Eliminate for it. So I think the defensive capabilities of Tyrant Scorn can still be seen in this game, but not in that position.
Makes sense, as we're going to see the Scarab God returned from beyond hit the battlefield once again, and Siggy just finding the correct lands all the time. Just he hasn't had a single issue yet so far with finding the right colors.
Yeah, so far we are seeing this Niv deck perform you know, above expectation as all mana is hit. 5-color turn 5 Niv-Mizzet was on board, and for Mike Sigrist, the pain is just beginning, and Antonio can only look on as more expensive cards. This is the downside of playing this Golgari midrange deck where you have gone so heavy. The full 4 copies of Elder Gargaroth, the full 4 copies of Casualties of War, add in a Vraska Relic Seeker. That's a lot of 5 and 6 mana cards to be bringing, and if you
Yeah.
draw too many of them, like in this position, you don't get to double spell.
Well, a tricky situation here for Antonio, because if he just deploys a threat on the battlefield like an Elder Gargaroth, he's going to be dead, unfortunately, because we do have a way to get rid of that creature off the board.
Yeah, he does have the saving grace of that eliminates still, thanks to the tapped land he drew last turn, giving him the extra 2 mana. So even though we're going to see the tempo bounce of the Tyrant Scorn here, Antonio can eliminate this Hydroid Krasis in response and ensure that he is not dead next turn, but that won't help him against the impending threat of Scarab God Bring Back Niv-Mizzet Reborn.
Oh, it's going to be brutal indeed. As we see exactly as you mentioned, eliminate, getting rid of the Hydroid Krasis. That goes to the bin. Scarab God, what you going to find for us?
Yeah, Mike going to do this on the upkeep rather than waiting until the main phase, just to make sure that he's able to make the most of the Scarab God trigger, get the extra scry, and at this point, it doesn't really matter. Once again, Antonio just has so many expensive cards in hand, and any combination that he starts playing one at a time will not get the job done here against the engine that Mike Sigrist has now put together.
Oh yeah, this looks almost unbeatable at this point, as he's just drawing gas continuously off the top of the library, finding ways to wrap up this game in very short order. As the Scarab God swings in for 5, down to 5 goes Antonio. Does he have anything left to take care of this battlefield? There's a Binding the Old Gods.
Not really.
Will that keep him alive for a turn?
Yeah, if he removes the Scarab God, it would keep him alive for a turn theoretically. Unfortunately for Antonio, Mike does have 4 more mana to bring back another creature. There is the Hydroid Krasis in his graveyard. Yes, this is 0/0, but Scarab God makes it a 4/4 regardless, so he would still be presenting lethal damage, and that game goes about as expected.
Wow. All right. So there you go, everyone. We get to see the 5-color Niv-Mizzet in action. I would say that was almost exactly how you want to see this deck perform. Would that be a fair assessment?
That is about as good as it gets, yeah.
Okay. All right. So taking a look at the sideboard here, we're going to shuffle around a few extra cards, take out the irrelevant ones. We see the Clarions coming out here for Mike Sigrist. Any other tools that could help these players in this matchup?
I think the big thing for Mike Sigrist isn't even the cards that he gets to bring in, even though those are quite good, getting Casualties, getting Dovin's Veto. It's that he gets to take out these Deafening Clarions and Shadow's Verdicts from his deck, these cards that don't do anything. Considering every card in this deck is so high quality, he has so many tools just to fight what Antonio is bringing. And Antonio on the other side is kind of the same, but at the same time, his end game isn't as good as what Mike has brought to the table here. His deck becomes better. He boards out some of the expensive cards. Thought Distortion, quite strong against this 5-color Niv deck. But again, you play it, and if there's a Niv-Mizzet in your opponent's hand, it's not taking it, and you could take everything else. Niv-Mizzet will come back down and do it all over again.
Yeah, it's certainly a tricky matchup here for the Golgari midrange deck. It's kind of reminiscent of the decks that we saw probably about a year ago, when everyone was just playing as many Casualties of War main deck as they could, you know, get Nisses in there, ramp up, and just try and kill everything that you can see.
Yeah, I think in the era of Fires of Invention standard and Bant mid-range, Bant ramp standard, there were so many Planeswalkers and different cards like Glass Casket, that sort of thing, floating around, where it wasn't uncommon, especially with specifically Fires of Invention, for a board state to have 3 to 4 different card types in play. And Casualties, when it's consistently a 4-for-1, it's a very powerful card. So in that specific metagame, of course we were seeing so many Casualties. Now, with the rotation of War of the Spark, we've seen less and less Casualties of War seeing play, because Planeswalkers are just not as prevalent of a card type in the formats currently seeing a lot of play.
Very true at that. As we take a look at the opening hands here in game number 2 between Antonio Del Moral Leon and Mike Sigrist, Mike Sigrist, of course, up a game, having won a very convincing game one there against Antonio as we get things underway with a triumph apiece for both players.
Yeah, that triumph off the top was perfect for Mike. He previously was looking at a very awkward hand that only had two lands that would come into play tapped, and that was problematic because Antonio on the other side has this aggressive Skyclave Shade start that can try to pressure Mike. But now, because of that triumph, Mike gets to play Cold Steel Heart on turn 2. Antonio can't play Binding yet, so all he has is Phyrexian Arena available to him, and that means Mike can actually break serve by playing his Binding first.
Mm-hmm. Deal with the Skyclave Shade or with the Arena and keep finding as many cards as we can. Go get some more land, get Niv-Mizzet out on turn 4. Oh, excuse me, turn 5.
Yeah, I think from Mike, it's going to be Skyclave Shade I'll deal with later. I'm not that worried about that. I don't want Antonio to get more cards here.
Yeah. Down comes Binding, takes care of the Phyrexian Arena. A Elder Gargaroth drawn off the top there for Antonio, who does have another copy of Phyrexian Arena in hand. But will he choose to go for the Binding here and try and slow down Mike Sigrist?
Yeah, I would expect Antonio would want to Binding Mike's Cold Steelheart here. The Binding of the Old Gods in play for Mike is going to give him another land next turn. Antonio can also Vraska instead to get the same job done while developing the Planeswalker. But the goal here is don't let Mike have potentially 5 mana next turn. 5 mana means Niv-Mizzet, Niv-Mizzet means disaster, and Antonio just needs to avoid that outcome at all costs.
Here comes Vraska, Golgari Queen, destroying the Cold Steel Heart, so no mana off of that. Another Binding the Old Gods drawn off the top of the library for Sigrist, as the one on board will go and find a forest for him.
Yeah, a forest in this deck almost loses all meaning, considering you can get literally any combination of colors and mana with it. But what is important here is Mike doesn't have a fourth untapped land here. He does still have this Maelstrom Pulse to deal with Vraska, get it off the board. Yes, you're going to continue taking a few more hits, but you're on the verge of stabilizing. And for Antonio, if he actually plays Phyrexian Arena or Elder Gargaroth next turn, it won't quite be good enough as there is another copy of Binding in Mike's hand.
So Siggy, just picking his target, decides to go for the Planeswalker, so that'll get on out of here. And a Thought Distortion drawn for Antonio. No land, so we're a bit a ways from that. But if he were able to resolve that, that would be pretty good indeed.
Yeah, pretty good, but unfortunately just a little too far, and that means Mike has, again, the time to develop this Binding. Yes, Antonio can answer back with his own Binding, but that means he's not putting on more pressure here.
Talk about pressure. This Skyclave Shade has done a good chunk of damage to Mike Sigrist, now down to 8, as the second one is going to join the fray.
Yeah, these Skyclave Shades are doing great work here in this matchup. I think they're part of the reason that Mike actually brought in his copies of Legion Warboss, as the Warboss tokens can attack through the Shade and maybe try to put on his own pressure if he recognizes this is what the game is coming down to.
Oh, speak of the devil, there's the Legion Warboss.
Unfortunately, Warboss tokens not great at blocking on the turn that they are created. So even if Mike was to play Legion Warboss here, he may have to end up throwing it under a Skyclave Shade if Antonio even gives him that option. So we're getting to a point where Antonio will just be able to win the game with 2 more attacks of these Shades without Mike being able to interact. All the copies of Shadow's Verdict and Deafening Clarion were boarded out. And yeah, I think Antonio recognizes what his game plan is here. Get rid of the Warboss and try to just close this.
Yeah, and it looks like he's going to do just that because Mike Sigrist is on 2 now. Sure, this little 1/1 has Death Touch, but little guy, you're not going to get too much done here as Niv-Mizzet Reborn is going to hit the battlefield. What can we find for Siggy? It's a Yasharn and a Casualties of War.
We see the beautiful Niv-Mizzet animation, but unfortunately for Siggy, Maelstrom Pulse is going to take care of one of these blockers, and the other unblocked Shade will be lethal, so Antonio is going to force a game 3 here.
Nice. Very nicely done, Antonio. There we go. Picks up game number 2, and we're going to move on to game number 3. After seeing these Skyclave Shades and just the impact they had on that match, do you think Mike Sigrist reconsiders the Deafening Clarions?
I think he'll certainly reconsider the Shadows verdicts at least. A
Hmm.
big difference between this game and the last game is Mike is going to be the one on the play. I think it was reasonable for Mike to have already assumed that the Skyclave Shades would be coming in, but perhaps he went a little too greedy with the 4 copies of Dovin's Veto. May reconsider some of those, may reconsider some different choices as you see them moving them aside. But I think from his point of view, he has to ask himself on the play, am I still going to be cold to these shades, or am I going to be able to snowball enough in a way where I'd rather have these Dovins videos? I'm going to try to put the game in a position where I play Legion War Boss and suddenly I can just counter the binding. I can counter the Vraska because, yes, the shades were problematic there, but they weren't the only problem. The problem was
Hmm.
the shade was backed by Vraska and binding and Phyrexian Arena and continuing to ask Mike questions that required answers. And I think Mike in his position may just think my sideboarding is good. I just needed a bit more time. I needed a better hand. I may need to mulligan a bit more aggressively. I need to be in the driver's seat against the Skyclave Shade plan from Antonio.
Siggy's happy with his sideboarding decisions, a few couple tweaks being made here and there by Antonio. Anything standing out for you in what he's doing?
Not particularly. He is bringing those 2 copies of Eliminate, which he had previously sideboarded out, just because, again, he's on the draw this time with Mike on the play. He doesn't want to get run over in the same way that he just did to Mike from a Legion War Boss. So perhaps wanting a few copies of cheaper removal is what he's thinking about, just to make sure that he's at least hedged a little against the possibility of a turn 3 War Boss just going unimpeded, backed up with a couple of Dovin's vetoes on perhaps the first binding, the first extinction event, the Vraska that comes down, and that may be enough to seal the game away from Mike.
It's game number 3 between these two players. Let's see how this one shakes out. On the play is Siggy taking a look at this opening hand. 2 Triumphs and a Drowned Catacomb. Not the worst.
Not the worst, certainly not the best. You have some amount of mana online. The big problem with this hand is there's no green mana in it. So
Mm-hmm.
this Maelstrom Pulse is not actually castable. Siggy is keeping this purely on the basis of hoping Dovin's Veto buys him enough time to find some of the tools he's looking for. But on the other side, Antonio's hand looking quite good. There's already a Skyclave Shade there, has a Thoughtseize to get a better sense of what he's up against. So for Mike, if he doesn't draw a green land, but rather draws something like a Cold Steelheart, that Maelstrom Pulse sitting in Antonio's hand may spell disaster.
Here comes turn 1 Thoughtseize. You'll love to see it as the Thoughtseize player. On the other side of things, though, it's not what you want to see at all. As we take a look at Siggy's hand, sees the Scarab God. One of the best ways to deal with a Scarab God is to get it out of here. Into the bin you go. You will not come back.
Yeah, I think Antonio recognizes that if this game goes at all in a way that is favorable for Mike, the Scarab God is going to be the problem card. If the game doesn't get to a point where the Scarab God is a problem, then it's not going to matter regardless. So he may as well take the card that is Mike's win condition, and everything else can come later.
So you did mention that finding Cold Steel Heart would be pretty big indeed. He did find it. He's now ramping, and Siggy is looking pretty good for the time being. We'll be able to get to these removal spells that have green in them, but the Skyclave Shade is rocking on the other side, and looking to repeat what it did in the game number 2.
Yeah, it looks like Antonio is considering casting Wolf Willow Haven here, but taking a moment to think about it, I think this pause is considering whether he should be Maelstrom pulsing this Cold Steel Heart. Again, the worst case scenario for him, he's aware of all but 1 card in Mike's hand, but if
Mm-hmm.
Mike goes back to back land plus Niv-Mizzet Reborn, and those are the 2 cards Antonio doesn't know about, that could be really bad. So there was a consideration in his position to just go for the Maelstrom Pulse on the Cold Steel Heart. If it gets Dovin's vetoed, it gets Dovin's vetoed. You have plenty of targets for it, and if it doesn't, then you can try to keep Mike off of that mana.
Speaking of mana, Mike just seems to be finding it left, right, and center here as he finds another Cold Steel Heart that he's able to deploy. All the while keeping Dovin's Veto to prevent any pesky non-creature card.
Yeah, second Cold Steel Heart, kind of funny here, considering if Mike at any point doesn't leave up Dovin's veto or Antionio finds a way to get rid of it with another Thoughtseize or Duress, for example, then Maelstrom Pulse will actually take care of both of the artifacts at the same time. Not something we see too often in Historic, but certainly one of the features of Maelstrom Pulse that makes it such a powerful card. And from Mike's point of view, this is a position where he's stable-ish, but he really needs to find one of those big payoffs like Niv-Mizzet Reborn, like Hydroid Krasis, to try to actually keep up with what Antonio's doing.
So it'll be interesting to see here what Antonio deploys. Is just going to go for the Wolfwillow Haven and keep applying pressures. Like, oh, I see that veto. It's fine. I'm just going to throw things in the battlefield here.
Wow, and Antonio actually sacrificing a piece of mana, going for that Wolfwillow Haven, perhaps a recognition that if he was to play any Planeswalker here instead, he would just get Casualties Award anyways, which would destroy the enchantment, the creature, the Planeswalker, and a land. So not wanting to give too much to his opponent, but part of the problem here is it does again put him back a land now, and Mike is able to cast the Casualties anyways, getting more or less the same result.
Well, he's going to even it out now, right? He can just Maelstrom Pulse, kill the 2 Cold Steel Hearts, and get a Crawling Barrens down.
Yeah, and he can also Thoughtseize with that top deck, take care of this Dovin's Veto or Maelstrom Pulse, likely the Dovin's Veto, as it is the one that Mike is able to leave up alongside Cold Steel Heart next turn. And now if he just goes land, Maelstrom Pulse, get rid of both Cold Steel Hearts, this is really bad for Mike at the moment.
Great back and forth here between these two players, just keeping each other's threats in check. Doesn't go for the Maelstrom Pulse. Is he going to try and get 3 here?
I don't know if he's going to try to get 3. Maybe that could actually be the consideration, but certainly Antonio taking a bit of a gamble that Mike is not going to draw anything here, which, you know, if Mike doesn't, that works out great for you. There's no reason to get rid of these lands or these artifacts, the sources of mana, if Mike doesn't have anything to do with them. The problem is this Niv-Mizzet deck can top deck quite well. Oh my god.
I wonder if we're going to unlock a secret achievement here in the game of Magic the Gathering. So keep an eye on the corner of the screen.
Maybe something
will pop up and be like, you have unlocked a new achievement. 3 Cold Steel Hearts down. Congratulations.
You see the nod from Antonio. This is exactly as he wrote it up here. As for Mike, this Maelstrom Pulse is going to be quite sad. Antonio does not have a 5th land, so the Nissa Who Shakes the World not castable quite yet. He will need something off the top. But even if he does draw the land for Nissa Who Shakes the World, I think there may be a question for him as to whether he's going to play the Nissa or Maelstrom Pulse these 3 Cold Steel Hearts.
Oh, please, please, Maelstrom Pulse. I want to see it. Chat wants to see it, I'm sure.
Well, there's no question now. Wolfwillow Haven, the perfect companion to this Maelstrom Pulse, giving you the 3rd mana. And I've been talking about this for a few turns now. It hasn't happened yet, but I feel fairly confident we are going to see the 3 Cold Steel Hearts go away now.
It's like hitting jackpot. That was awesome.
You just see 3 7s roll up on the screen.
Zagoth Triome drawn off the top here. Cycle into a Dovin's Veto, which
that's massive.
He will be able to cast. That is such a good find there for Mike Sigrist. Oh, Nissa. If only you knew.
If only. If Antonio knew about this, he would consider playing around it and maybe just activate Crawling Barrens and start trying to put on pressure that way. But as it stands, the one unknown card from Mike Sigrist is the exact answer to what Antonio was presenting there.
On the plus side, Siggy is in top deck mode. Antonio does have a threat to deploy next turn. It's another Triumph, so Siggy gets to cycle. Can he get lucky one more time?
Another Dovin's Veto would be great. Something like a Thought Erasure would be fantastic. That is the primary reason for doing the cycle on your turn, rather than waiting on your opponent's turn for them to do something like a Duress against you or a Thoughtseize.
Oh,
okay.
All right, Antonio, it's on you now.
That's good.
Okay. Skyclave Shade jumps out of the graveyard, says, hey, pick me, pick me. Not this turn, buddy. We're going to make pirates. Yarr! But here comes Niv-Mizzet Reborn. Does he hit?
Oh,
he
hits.
Does.
Oh, boy, does he hit.
Ooh, that's what we like to see. Good job, Niv.
Okay. Would love to take the casualties of war here, but does not have a sixth land, does not have a second green source. So I think the safe play is take the Maelstrom Pulse. You need to get this Vraska off the board. Mortify isn't able to do that. I don't know if Mike can risk this. Vraska is going to be an answer to Niv-Mizzet, and then he's going to be facing down a whole bunch of damage. Maybe he's thinking with that Crawling Barrens, with that Vraska, he needs the casualties of war to get back into this game. But it's very risky if he doesn't hit that green source. There's not that many untapped green sources in this deck.
You know what? Sometimes you just gotta do it. You just gotta believe in the heart of the cards, and it'll all work out all right. I mean, look at this deck. It is like greed.deck, okay? If you're not gonna go for the big play, why are you playing this deck in the first place?
It is a masterpiece of greed. I absolutely agree with you. And I think perhaps Mike just recognizing that he will need something like that casualties of war to win this game. But I'm very scared for his position right now.
Well, Vraska is going, nope, I'm not having any of that. Get off my board. I am in control here.
Yeah, Antonio has the option to play the Zagoth Triome. There is still a Skyclave Shade in the graveyard that he can play with Kicker as a 5/3. Doesn't even need to play the one in his hand if he doesn't want to. Can do so and actually do both thanks to the treasure token made by Vraska. So perhaps that's what he's considering here.
Oh man, this is such a rough spot for Mike Sigrist to be in. Looking at these creatures, only at 11 life, and able to get out all of these Skyclave Shades that have entered the graveyard. Oh my goodness, kicked as well. Woo, you gotta find something here, Siggy.
On tap black source, not going to do it. He needed a green source. Casualty still uncastable.
Oh boy.
Scarab God, not good enough here. Vraska is still on the battlefield, able to go -3 again on any creature that Mike plays as a blocker. So as things stand, Mike does not have any good plays available to him.
Could just see a pause here, mortify the biggest Skyclave Shade, and hold up a counter spell for something. Oof.
He could certainly try. Part of the problem there is Antonio does still have that Crawling Barrens on the battlefield as well. So the pressure is going to continue coming. Mike needed to be able to cast that Casualties of War to at least try to stabilize this board. This Legion War Boss can send his Goblin over at Vraska, but 4 is not 3. So Vraska can still -3, get rid of this War Boss and survive. And I think this is just game. Mike is going to mortify the Skyclave Shade, but that's going to result in Vraska down on Legion War Boss. Antonio can activate Crawling Barrens, and that would be the game. Antonio has full information about Mike Sigrist's hand. There's nothing hidden, nothing for him to be scared of. And I believe with a Vraska minus and a Crawling Barrens activation, Antonio Del Moraleon is going to have this match.
It certainly looks that way, but let's see if he is confident in all this information. Extinction event in hand, likely not be a part of the equation here. You know, you always got to make sure. You got to be 100% sure.
Absolutely. In this position, you have the chess clock timer for a reason. You have full information available to you. You see on Mike Sigrist's side, every card in his hand is known, and that's why Antonio just taking his time, thinking through every decision and confirming the math lines up. This 5/3 gets mortified, Mike is tapped out, 7 damage comes through, and that's lethal for Antonio.
That is the game. Antonio Del Moraleon picking up the victory against Mike Sigrist on 5-color Niv-Mizzet. Well, I tell you, that deck made for an excellent showing.